just before all this started, Mohan was saying that usually there are stools here.
Yes, there are bar stools, yeah.
The only time I sit on a bar stool, Mohan, if there's a bar nearby. Otherwise, I prefer this kind of seating.
Pointy.
Okay, just wanted to make that point to you.
Yeah, unfortunately, we haven't reached that point at Wandering Artist, have we, Kaveri? When we can have a bar set up in the next room and we can promise people sitting on bar stools that we can return to the bar after the conversation. We'll get there, Tim, we'll get there. But yes, we do offer the guests the choice of seating. So we say, do you prefer being on a bar stool or on the sofa? So this is the story behind why we are seated on a raised stage so everyone can see us. Thank you, Tim, for being here. It's wonderful.
Thank you very much for having me.
So we get the way we structure this conversation is for the next roughly about 60 minutes. I'll be in conversation with Tim. My role is that of a seeker, a student, trying to understand his journey, and so I have, his body of work is so vast that I can't cover all of it, but I do have some a flow of thought, and I will go with that. And then we'll open up the conversation for people in the audience to ask him questions. And we always pride ourselves with starting on time and finishing on time. I do have a clock right there that I will be constantly looking at. So this event will end at about 8:29 p.m. You can have your Saturday evening to yourselves. Okay? So we're all set. Let me ask you, Tim, my first question is a little bit about your early influences in your life. That when you look back now, what early influences do you think are relatable to your life as a writer now? And since you were born here, you grew up here, and I see some of that in one of your books, where you talk about a character called Krishna, who is an 8-year-old boy who grows up in a Telugu Naidu family. And the book is Four Steps from Paradise, which you, I think even in the New Indian Express interview the other day, just a week ago, you said was among your favorite books. So go back in time and tell us what about your upbringing you think could have influenced you to be the writer that you are today. And I have another question from that time. To me, Timeri N Murari is a very interesting name. Is there a story behind the name? Do you want to talk about it as well? So there are two questions there.
Well, I can answer the second one quite easy. Timeri is the village I come from. My family comes from.
Oh, so Timeri is the name of the village?
Yeah.
Okay.
The ancestral place where my grandfather, great-grandfather came from. So that answers that question. Don't have to go to. But going back to my childhood, as you want to say, I mean, I was very fortunate in that I had a family or a household in which books were everywhere. And in fact, I started reading, I think, at a very young age. I used to just love reading books, and Kipling was the easiest one to get at age and time. And the encyclopedias, history, novels, everything possible. My grandfather was also a kind of philosopher. My father had studied abroad in Oxford and came back, so there was that influence as well in my life of growing up here in Madras, and I have to admit in a very privileged household in a very large property. And so through that privileged life I had the leisure to read and to play and to do whatever I want until I was forced to go to school, which I hated. And so that broke that lovely young life of mine, because I was hauled off to school by my sisters and brothers who are older than me. So I had to go to school. And so, but I was growing up at that time in a city that was, as Mothai would have said, a gracious city. And I think he wrote a book called Madras, the greater city. And at that time, it was a very gracious city to grow up in, with a lot of wide spaces, not such a high population. So the privilege of that childhood was that one grew up in a city which was not that populated, wide streets. We actually even had pavements to walk on, which I think have all vanished, and tragically. And so through that kind of childhood, I mean, I never thought I was going to become a writer. That was never in my mind. It's just the fact that there were books. Somebody wrote them. I didn't even know who wrote them. The same way when I went to movies, I never know how they made movies. But I do remember that we were at a movie when the film stopped and a notice came up saying Gandhi was assassinated. Wow. And our driver came in frantically looking for us kids who were with my grandmother, and told us he must come immediately. And he'd also heard the news, and my father and grandfather had sent him to pick us up. So I think that was a very early memory that still remains in my family, that we were in a movie house when he was assassinated.
Wow.
And we got the news.
That's quite a memory. It's quite a memory. Let me ask you, how did this decision to pursue engineering come up? Was it influenced by a choice that your father or someone influenced you to do that, or did you pick it up on your own? And why UK? Why did you choose to go to the UK for your engineering at that time?
Well, at the age of 16, you don't know what the hell to do with your life. And your father or your family say, one son becomes a doctor, one son becomes an engineer. So my brother became the doctor, and my father pointed to me and said, why don't you become an engineer?
Okay.
Which at that time sounded like a brilliant idea, because I couldn't think of what else to do with my life or what I wanted to do. And so despite the fact I couldn't add 2 and 2 together properly without writing it down, because maths was very bad, not very good at maths, that an opening came up in England that there was a chance to go and train as an electronics engineer. And I think my father, to get rid of me, said, well, why don't you go there and become a brilliant electronic engineer? And that's how it happened. It was a choice that was kind of forced on me, but at the same time it sounded like an interesting idea because I couldn't think of what else to do.
Okay. I think we're having a problem with this mic, Dinesh. So give us a mic with a fresh set of batteries. Okay, we'll carry on with the conversation in the meantime. But thank you. So did you at all, I remember in my college days, and I'm sure many people over here will, if they reflect on it, will remember being closet writers, closet poets. Did you, in your teens, at all fancy writing? Did you attempt any writing at all?
No, I never had any of those closet things in my life. Maybe it was that age when I was just growing up and discovering girls. Closest I got to closet.
The closest you got to closet. So writing was nowhere on the...
Writing was nowhere in my horizon.
Okay.
It never occurred to me to become a writer. I had no idea how people wrote.
Okay.
I loved reading their books, but I had no idea that somebody actually sat down and wrote them.
So would it be right to say that Tim, you did not attempt any writing all the way till your adulthood?
Love letters. That's about it.
Do you have any of them preserved?
No, they never worked anyhow.
Thank you. This is getting interesting, but we'll move on to the, we'll save that part of the conversation for a bar stool sometime soon. Yeah. So let's move on to the decision that you took to at some point to question, what am I doing here in the UK in electronic engineering? Was that an evolutionary decision, questioning, or did it happen one night and say, I can't take this anymore, let me see what I can do? And then you choose to move to Canada to pursue history and political science. Why those subjects? Why not English literature, perhaps?
I think answering the first part of your question.
You can use the mic.
Well, answering the first part of the question, I realized within about a year and a half, that electronics and I just didn't work together. And it didn't like me, I didn't like it, and we, I think, came to a conclusion after a couple of years that I was wasting my time trying to grapple with the subject, which was totally beyond me. And by that time I'd made some very close friends and everything else, and I wanted to stay in England. But one of my sisters had moved to Toronto.
Okay.
And so she said, why don't you come and study in Canada? And I didn't want to go to Toronto, which meant I'd be under her thumb again. So I went to Montreal, which is a safe distance from my sister.
And that's how you...
And that's how I did it. And political science and history interested me. So I went to McGill to do that.
Okay.
And I came back to McGill and I had to write a history paper. And just for the fun of it, I wrote an article about my experience.
At the logging camp?
At the logging camp.
Okay.
And there were two papers that I admired very much. Because I did like reading papers, by the way. I was brought that up by my grandfather and my father to read the paper every day. So one was the New York Herald Tribune, which had some very good writers on it. And the other was a paper called the Manchester Guardian. And by the time I finished this article, the Herald Tribune had folded. So I sent it off to the Manchester Guardian, and not expecting anything out of it, and just went on with my studies. And then one day I opened the weekly paper, and there was my article.
Wow.
Fatal. And that's when I decided to become a writer.
How was that experience, looking at your name, your byline? Did you feel at that time, hey, this is exciting, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life, or did you?
Well, I was taken totally by surprise, and I must say, the first time you see your name in print, especially with a paper like the Manchester Guardian, which is now called the Guardian, and to have done it, because I didn't know anybody there, I just sent it to the features editor of the Guardian, and they ran the full page.
Wow.
On it with a big photograph, and there was my name the first. That's the most fatal thing that can happen to a writer when he first sees his name in print. After that, it's deja vu. But yes, that sort of decided me maybe I could become a writer.
Fantastic story. Thank you for sharing that with us. But you were also blessed in a way to have had the opportunity to not just write for The Guardian, but you wrote for the Sunday Times. In New York, you wrote for New York Times. In America, you wrote for New York Times and Washington Post. In India, you wrote for The Hindu, for the Indian Express. So, in a way, your career as a contributing writer to mainstream media was pretty eventful. You were accepted, and you could have stayed on in journalism. How did you move out of the role of a contributing writer or a columnist to becoming a full-time author? How did the marriage, which came out in 1973, really happen?
Well, I was at that time working in the Sunday Times, and they sent me to Coventry. I know that the saying is sent to Coventry, but this time I actually went to Coventry to do an article on, there was a problem, I'm trying to remember it again, but there was a problem among the unions, and Asian immigrants who felt they were being exploited, and there was a conflict going on there. And for reasons best known to editors, they looked around and saw me, the only Indian they could see, and said, go off to Coventry and find out more about this problem among the Indian immigrants there. Of course, they didn't know that I was a South Indian, they were all Punjabi, so I didn't speak Hindi and they didn't speak Tamil or Telugu. So we had to communicate in English. So anyhow, I wrote the story up. I was working with another reporter, Peter Pringle. So Peter and I spent a couple of months working on the story. And when we filed it, it turned out the legal affairs said, look, I mean, there are problems with this because we can't get it passed. We might have trouble because it's conflict between the unions and people and everything else. So I took that material and felt, having spent 2 months doing something, I thought I'd try and turn it into a novel. And that's how I came to write it as a novel finally.
Was there a conversation you had with somebody, or was it a purely individual decision to convert it into a novel?
Oh, it was more my decision, just to do it as an exercise, to see whether it could work or couldn't work. And I was very lucky, I found a good agent who sold it to Macmillan.
Fantastic. So that's how the marriage came out.
Yeah.
And the marriage, you set that story of the union strife as the backdrop, and you had a love story in the front, or the other way around, perhaps. I haven't read the book, but this is what I picked up, that it's a story of an Indian girl and a British boy.
Yeah, it's a love story, and she's finally sent back to India because she's fallen in love with this British boy, and they send her back to get the arranged marriage and everything else. So that's why I called it the marriage. And
how did you talk to us a little bit about that moment when? What is the moment when you see your name in print as a journalist? You see it in a paper. I think that's a different feeling. But when you hold the first copy of your published work as a book, I experienced it very differently. They were two different experiences. Were they the same with you? How was it holding your first copy from Macmillan, your advance copy?
it's like losing your virginity.
Okay, now that you can't put into words. That you can't put into words.
Right.
Right.
The first time, yeah.
You know, my sense of your writing is, and I'm taking it as an aside. I'll come to my question very quickly. But my sense of his writing is that he often all his words speak to you. His feelings are painted as words for us to understand. And when he says it's like losing your virginity, he leaves it for us to explore it in our own mind spaces. The Hindu once said that Timeri is a word painter. I read it up on the internet the other day. Let me get this right. Timeri is a word painter who...
Painter of words. I think it is Sri Kumar Varma.
Was it Sri who wrote that? Timeri is a word painter who vividly creates the atmosphere with minimum strokes of his pen. And I think that's exactly what you did just now. You know. So anyway, that came back to me from my reading up on you. So I'll continue the conversation. Let's go on. So that moment of holding the first copy of The Marriage, did you kind of decide at that time that you would do more books, or was it just that at that time it was just one? Because I'm asking you to understand, was there an ambitious streak in you saying, hey, I got one book, let me like put out 3 more in the next 2 years? Was there a plan? Was there a grand design? Something that you were chasing?
Not really. I continued my journalism, and then this is when I was living in England, that a lot of problems broke out in Liverpool, racial, and there was fighting among the kids. And so I asked my editor, Macmillan, whether she'd be interested in doing a non-fiction book on that. And she said, well, why don't you try and go up there and research it, and let's see what you get. So that's how I went up to Liverpool and spent, I think, 2 months in that area, and met all the kids, both the white and black, and talked to them and their families and all the problems they had. And it was ironic that often with all these families, when they saw me, they would bring out their forms, which the government had given them for some reason or the other. They'd asked me to please fill it all in and make sure they got it right. So I'd half the time be filling in forms for them, and they were all English-speaking people. But anyhow, I got to know all these kids very well and wrote about them. I mean, many of them had tragic lives, or tragic futures, I'd say. And that was a book that did come out called The New Savages.
The New Savages, right?
Yeah.
Right. I have a question on The New Savages. I'll come back to that. But so that's how the second book happened for you.
Yeah.
It was a work of non-fiction. I read somewhere that James Baldwin, the American writer, told you not to invest yourself in full-time writing, not to take up the onerous task of being a full-time writer.
Well, I was having dinner with Jimmy Baldwin, and I said, as a journalist, I said, I was going to become a writer, and he said, for God's sake, don't ever do that.
So why do you think he said that, and why do you think you didn't take him seriously, or did you even consider his insight?
Well, I'd read all James Baldwin's books, and we were having dinner with him, trying to do a story on him. And I was amazed that he would tell me this, but he had gone through such a difficult period in his own life and his own writing, so he was just passing on fatherly advice, telling me not to go through the same problem.
Mm-hmm. And you didn't take him seriously, thankfully.
No, I didn't. I took what he said and I knew what he meant. But you go the way you want, and I appreciated him telling me all that. But yes, I just went on to continue writing. Thank
you for that. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had so much of work that the world loves. So, in that time, when you were you in New York at that time?
No, that was London.
That was in London that you met James Baldwin. But in the time that you were perhaps between London and New York, you were as I see it, as I understand it, doing multiple things. You were a journalist, you were a columnist, you were also making documentaries, right? And you were also writing books.
No, documentary. Yeah, my life does get confusing even for me at times. I was in New York, and a British channel called Thames Television, and a friend of mine who was a director asked me to think of a series, documentary series for America. So I decided to do a series called Only in America, which was the first one, because I was brought up on cowboys as a kid going to movies. One was on a cowboy, and so we set this in Texas, so I had to go there and meet all these Texan ranchers and cowboys. And then the second one was about a young, at that time in America, there was a sort of movement of black people returning to the Deep South because of a change in economy and change in lifestyles. So there was this movement, I would say, in the late 70s of going back. So I did. So I spent about 4 months researching that with them, and saw the many ways people kill each other. So those were documentary series I wrote and co-produced at that time. But then I was living in New York. So
How do you straddle the different genres of writing, different forms of writing? Especially because writing has come naturally to you. You haven't gone to a school to understand and learn creative writing. And I think writing for the screen is very different from writing in a book, and it's very different from writing a column, it's very different from writing a news story. So there are different forms of writing, and how did you train yourself in these different forms?
Well, I think from my writing immediately, I'd say I was taught by all the reading I did, both as a child, as an adult, and I continue to read. And films have always been a challenge because I went to a number of movies, so I just wanted to know how they made and wanted to see whether I could write a screenplay. So that's why I decided to try to write a film. And I wrote these documentaries, and I learned a lot about how you have to write for camera, and also how to work with people. The one thing about being a writer is you're all alone in a room. Working in films or in documentaries, you're out with actual living human beings. So it's a great feeling to be out. So I enjoyed doing that. So trying to work in film, and trying to work in the theatre.
Fantastic. Today when I had this seed of the germ of an idea, let me call it, to make my book fall like a rose petal into a screenplay. I went with Vani to attend a screenplay writing workshop, and the one decision we took after the workshop is, we can't think like them. We can't do this. And I'm finding you're self-taught in that space. You've experimented, you've been adventurous, and you've been
Well, I'd like
very
to say,
prolific there.
kind of self-taught that I was lucky during my days in London that I worked with two American producers, John Cohen, who's now gone, and Alan Bernheim, and they were wanting to do a film. And since they knew I could write, and I was the cheapest writer they could find in the whole of London who would sit down and do it. So they had I think they had their offices in somewhere off Oxford Street. So I'd turn up that daily and sit down and at the typewriter, and we'd have this long dialogue and monologue, and then they say, okay, you write this scene, and you see how it goes and everything else. So John Cohen had just made two very successful films. He made, from the John Fowles novels, what's that?
French Lieutenant's
No, he wrote the Magus and the one before that with Terence Stamp. Anyhow, he was a very successful producer. So he told me, he said the one thing when you're writing for film, you have to write for the camera. Unless you can move the camera, you don't have a script. You cannot move scene to scene through dialogue. It's got to be through the camera. So I worked with them for about 3 months, for which I was barely paid, and then they decided that the whole film wasn't working. But that's how I learned to write for films, because I was lucky to have him, and in fact another friend of his called Stanley Mann, who also came in with sessions to teach me how to write movies. And he's also a very successful Hollywood screenwriter. So between the three of them, I picked up a lot of how to write screenplays. So I'm not self-taught. I was
You
taught
had
by,
influences.
I was taught by 3 very professional American movie makers.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm glad you had those influences. We were a bit intimidated by that space because, as you pointed out, the writer just writes, but I think a screenwriter has to think through the camera, and the visual appeal has to be there. Let's move on. Let me ask you a little bit about the themes that you explored in some of your books and your inspirations. One theme that struck me, there's, by the way, a PhD that's been done on his works. And I read up parts of that PhD in preparation for today's conversation. And
I don't know why this poor fella did it. He's too young me, to be honest.
The one theme that seems to touch many of your books is relationships. And what I pick up from what I read is that the way Tim looks at life is that people who are married need not necessarily be in love. So that's one theme that comes across from some of the reading that I did. And that having sex is not necessarily all about love. So there is a quality about love that you are distilling and you're sharing on the one side, and you're also talking about relationships so differently from other people, where you're talking about relationships beyond gender, beyond caste, beyond even countries, nationalities. And so my question really is, what makes you look at some of these themes? And in my opinion, I think you were a little ahead of your time. If you had been writing on those themes now, you would be making a lot of friends out there who would want to, agree with you more than they would have perhaps done at that time. So, what makes you a person who was ahead of your time with that kind of thought? What inspirations led to those kind of writings?
Well, every writer, I think it was Graham Greene who said every writer has an icicle in his heart. So it was really writing about the people I knew, my family, my friends, and I would bring them into my novels and cleverly disguise them so they wouldn't recognize themselves. And it is, every writer writes about relationships at the end of the day. He's writing about love affairs, he's writing about happy marriages, broken marriages, and just relationships. This has been going on for a couple of thousand years. So I can't say I'm being very original in that. I do, because of my background of living here, there, and everywhere, that I do bring in interracial relationships. And as a child, there's one thing I never knew anything about in my family was caste. Neither my grandfather or my father mentioned that word in front of me. So I never knew anything about it. And so that has helped me to at least have a much wider view of people around me. And it takes me a long time to identify. In fact, sometimes I cannot identify what caste anybody is in. So that has helped in my writing, at least for me. And when you say a bit earlier times, my marriage, I think, was the first novel that came out about Indian immigrants in England. And even the reviewers there said this was the first time anybody has written about immigrants, and because otherwise they weren't written about. Now today there are hundreds of writers writing about immigrants. So in that context, I was a bit ahead of my time. My wife says I'm always ahead of my time.
But the beauty is that a lot of what you talk about relationships, the fact that loveless marriages are untenable, for example, this is a reality that has been there for time immemorial. But very few people have talked about it in the open. You've talked about it through fiction, and you call it cleverly disguising the characters. Did it never strike you to do a non-fiction work in that space?
I have thought about it, but it's trying to get people to talk. So it's easy to make them talk through fiction and watching them and then write about them. Because trying to get, most people are very resistant to telling you their secrets, unless you're lucky enough to be a psychiatrist in America, where you learn all the secrets because people all spend all their time on the couch. So I'm not in that situation. So when I see people, I write and invent stories around them, and seeing how their lives work or how their marriages work. And I think when talking about marriage, a loveless marriage, in my novel, The Small House, I think it's
The Small House, yeah.
Which is about a loveless marriage and how the woman learns to survive through it, and because that's what she's accepted to do, and has to live with it, even though she is in love with somebody else, and always has been, which she discovers over the period of the novel. So these are things I've observed from a distance, or even from closer by, and disguise them as fictional characters.
So it's a lot easier to tell the story or share the philosophy, if I may.
Yes, it is easy.
Well, it is fiction.
Writing is never easy, so like somebody else once that asked me that, and they said, oh, it must be easier, isn't it? Writing is never easy. But it's a way of expressing oneself through what you see around you, and then taking it and weaving it into a story and trying to explore your own life. I think somebody asked Daphne du Maurier why she wrote, and she said, in order to find out what I'm thinking, which is very true.
I can completely relate to that point. Of many people being in loveless marriages, and I think that's a truth that society is confronted with at all times. Osho says it very beautifully. He says that the relating is more important than the relationship, and if there is no relating, then the relationship has no sense. And he says love is not a one-time thing, it's in the present continuous. And I think in some of the reviews I read on your works, people do talk about having taken that away as a learning, that it's important to be relating and to be loving somebody than to be stuck in a relationship which is not going anywhere. And to that extent, I think you managed to communicate to a large audience out there. But I think today's generation would be rich in what many people consider to be one of your most popular and your most delightful novels, The Taliban Cricket Club. I thought the title was a bit striking. Ruxana, the main character in your book, is a very strong woman, confused at times, lacking the courage instantaneously, but picking it up over time. So, in a way, you were talking about a woman that believes in the power of freedom and believes in the power of the fact that love will triumph over tyranny, because it's set in the times of the Taliban. So, what was the motivation for the book and for the characterization of Ruxana the way you did?
Well, I think I've said that, before that I saw a small clipping in the newspaper that the Taliban suddenly decided to introduce cricket to Afghanistan. This was the year 2000. And they'd been ruling for 4 years, and up to that date you couldn't laugh, you couldn't sing, you couldn't dance, you couldn't do anything, because it was all forbidden. And then suddenly out of the blue, you couldn't even play sports. They stopped everybody playing sports. And then suddenly they announced they were going to bring about cricket, and that fascinated me, and so I thought about it, and I thought I could get someone like Dennis Lilly to go and teach them how to play cricket, but that didn't seem to be a very exciting idea. But then I thought, I was watching a women's cricket match, I think, and I thought, well, why not have a woman teach the young men how to play cricket? And that's how the story finally came about. And so when I went to Kabul, I was lucky enough to meet a number of Afghan women who had been through the Taliban period.
Mm-hmm.
And they were very articulate and told me about their lives and how they survived it and how they managed to get through it. And in fact, despite the fact that they had to keep wearing the burqa and all that, and they couldn't go out without a mahan, they also felt very sorry for the men, because the men had to grow beards and pray 5 times a day, and otherwise they were beaten. So they gave me both sides of the story. And so that's how slowly my character, Ruxana, came about. And I was in Kabul Airport, and I was trying to think of how to write this Ruxana, and I looked across, and there was this wonderful woman, who was surrounded by other women, and she was so bright and laughing and talking, and I immediately stole her to make her into Ruxana.
This was on your return, when you were returning?
No, in the airport. Yeah,
when you were returning from Kabul?
Yeah.
So you saw this girl at Kabul Airport?
Yeah.
That's interesting. So you're, once again, a real life persona finds its place in your book as a main character.
Yeah.
That's interesting. To me, and I was talking to somebody else who I don't think I see him here. He promised to come today, but we were talking about the Taliban Cricket Club, and to me, Ruxana is just a metaphor. It's a metaphor for a very strong woman, a determined woman, who decides to make use of the constraints that she's placed in to find a way out of them. I think that's so. Therefore, many people may find themselves in a situation like that. Did you expect your book to communicate that message?
Well, I certainly wanted them to understand that this was a very strong woman, and all women are very strong. I wasn't trying to say only one is, because then also my character was a hairdresser in that, who rebels, and the other women, even her mother, rebels against constraints put on her. So I I wasn't trying to be just specific about one woman. I know all women are very strong. And Lucerna is an inventive, intelligent woman who is just looking to try and lead a normal life and not having to be trapped by these patriarchal dictates that surrounded her life. And she was trying to throw off the constraints. She had thrown them off, and then the Taliban came and brought them all back again. So I was just trying to write a story about a woman who had courage to fight against the people who had constrained her.
So the message, I think, is more a reader's takeaway.
But the readers take away so many things from a novel.
You never know.
I never know it's the same novel they've read.
What I can see as a life lesson, which is that we got to be who we are, and we got to say what's on our mind and not just be trapped in what others. And then you go back and you, perhaps to feel accomplished yourself with your screenplay, to feel fulfilled with your screenplay.
The day, what you do to a character, my character, was deliberate by him. And when I was at the London Film Festival, and the film was shown and I was on stage with him, the audience did ask me that one question, pointing it at me, saying, why did you kill that character? So I just pointed and said, he did it, not me. So after that, and Paleka just said, well, I think he had to die or something stupid like that. So that's why I went and did it a stage play.
Very, very interesting. So did you feel complete and fulfilled that your creation appeared as it is on the stage version?
Well, it wasn't a vindication or anything. I wanted to just tell it's one and the same. I'm hoping both of them bought the book. Whether he likes it or not. That's what counts at the end. So if you try and think of your bad reviews or your good reviews.
If Bhima had not come into your life, if you had not gone through those experiences, you would not have made that trek to make the leap.
Well, there's a big long question there. Okay, me and Paleka. And my wife says, don't bring that up for me. Because Paleka might be a talented director, but at the end of the day, what you do to a character, my character, was deliberate by him. And when I was at the London Film Festival, and the film was shown and I was on stage with him, the audience did ask me that one question, pointing it at me, saying, why did you kill that character? So I just pointed and said, he did it, not me. So after that, his wife went off in tears. He was furious at me and had an argument with me about it. And I said, you know, you did something which I told him, which we fought about, and he said, during the shoot, he said, I'm going to stop shooting now, if you don't agree with what I did. I said, I don't agree with what you've done. And he threatened to stop shooting. So I didn't like him as a human being. I don't know how many people do. But that's my personal point of view. And after the film came out, the Leicester Haymarket Theatre wondered whether I could develop it into a stage play, which is quite a challenge because the movie takes place, is set in a landscape in which they're moving. And so I had to bring it all down to a stage, you know, half the size of this room. And I was lucky with both the set designer, my actress who was Parvina Nagra, and Rahul Bose, and other members of the Asian cast over there, Asian Indian cast, and a very, very, very talented lighting director. So through that I could do it. So I got my back doing the play, telling the story the way I wanted it to told. That it had, any story has to have a logical ending, and you've got to give a reason. If you kill someone, you have to give a reason as to why you kill someone. And Paleka just said, well, I think he had to die or something something stupid like that. So that's why I went and did it a stage play.
Very, very interesting. So did you feel complete and fulfilled that your creation?
Well, it wasn't a vindication or anything. I wanted to just tell the story the way I'd written it.
Just simple.
Just as simple as that, and not having some bugger screw it up.
His honesty comes up in all his writing in any case, and so many of you are his friends, so you do know how upfront he is about things. The story we are referring to is a story called Daira, the square circle, where a woman falls in love with a transvestite, and in Palekar's version on screen, the transvestite is killed, and in the original, the transvestite is not. So that's what we're referring to. I thought I should have given that preamble before I even asked the question. You've had after that you had another opportunity for your work to be turned into a screen version, which is Taj, which is one of your best-selling novels, which was translated into many languages. And I read that Sanjay Khan approached you with the filming, wanting the filming rights for a television series that he planned, and he wanted you to write the screenplay as well. But for various reasons, it didn't happen the way it was planned. And given the fact that many Indian filmmakers now are making period films, Padmavat, for example, is one of them, or Bajirao was another one. Do you think Taj as a film story has not received its due? Does that rankle you at times?
Well, you live with all this. Sanjay did try very hard to try and get it done, but I think at that time he was going through certain problems. And then a producer from Dubai took it up and couldn't quite get it together. But now it's supposedly being done by Farhan Akhtar.
Oh, it is? Okay.
On as a web series of, for Netflix of Amazon.
Okay.
So whether that happens, I have no idea. But anyhow, he's supposed to be doing something on it. So it might happen one day.
I noticed something that many of us struggle to achieve, which is a high sense of detachment in the answer that you just gave. You would find many writers, sweating over the fact that their work, which almost made it into a film, did not, reach that level. How do you stay detached from your work? I mean, does success and failure matter to you at all, or is it just your writing?
Well,
when I say success, I want to qualify it. Does your novel like Taj, a bestseller, has the potential to be a great film or a television series, but has not seen that, and you remain detached and you're taking it easy? How's that
Well, there's no point in spending sleepless nights over it. If it happens, it happens, because the film business is very mercurial. I learned that long ago because I've worked in films both in Hollywood and elsewhere. And this has happened to me before, as my wife well knows, that one of my novels was optioned 6 times by Hollywood but never made. And so Taj might happen through Farhan Akhtar. He said he's going to do it, but if he does, it's fine. And if he doesn't, as long as the check doesn't bounce, I'm okay.
You look at life. How do you take? On that note, let me also ask you. I've seen some of your work being criticized as well. How do you take criticism?
Badly.
Does it stay on and affect your writing process for a long period of time, or how do you spit it out?
No, I don't bother about it. Some people will say it's a good book. Some people will say that's what. When you ask me about my writing, I said people read the same novel and come out with different reactions. So somebody doesn't like it, that's fine. I mean, somebody loves it, that's fine. I mean, it's one and the same. I'm hoping both of them bought the book, whether he likes it or not. That's what counts at the end. So if you try and think of your bad reviews or your good reviews, you're not going to write. You're going to just be frozen because you think, oh, I need another good review.
You remind me again of Rumi. Rumi said, criticism polishes your mirror, he said. So that sense of detachment with good or bad, and I mean, these are relative, right? I mean, what may appear good to someone may actually be unpalatable for someone else. So these are very relative. And so if as a writer, if as a creator, you can stay away from those definitions, from those labels, then your journey is a lot more smoother. I want to come to the last segment before I open up the questions. Something that's very close to me and what I've loved about Tim's work, which is his two books, non-fiction works, based on both are based on real life experiences. The world calls them memoirs, but they're lived experiences. One is my temporary son, and the other is limping to the center of the world. So the hero for me, for the temporary son, where he talks about how a child came into their lives, into Maureen and Tim's life, from an orphanage who needed a very risky procedure, a surgery to be done, and how both of them take care of the child and gave Tim a peek into fatherhood. And because a child had to get well, a man like Tim, who has very rational views of life, does not believe in destiny or God or religion the way the world sees it, undertakes with a bad knee a trip to Mount Kailash so that the child may heal. And this is the way I understand it, so this may not be exactly your version, but this is the way I understand it. So he writes a book on that, which is Limping to the Center of the World. Both these books are very powerful, and the hero for the first book to me is Maureen, because of the leadership she took of Bhima's life, Bhima as the child, and how she persisted with her efforts to find him the doctors, the treatment, and bring in the money which was needed for the surgery and all of that. So I'm going to base a couple of questions with that overview. I'm going to base a couple of questions on that. Writing these two books, Tim, and if I've strayed from any factual perspectives, please feel free to clarify them. But writing these two books, My Temporary Son and Limping to the Center of the Universe, did that change you, the process of writing and telling the story? Have you started looking at life differently after both these books?
I think so, because I think Temporary Son changed our lives very much. The impact, because we didn't have our own children, and to have this wounded baby in our hands and to look after, and which Maureen looked after so well, that certainly changed our lives, and you shift your focus on what's important. And his life was more important during that period. And so that certainly affected both my thinking and my writing. And it was only a couple of years later, when he had to go for another surgery when he was in Paris, that my sister had said she wants to go to Kailash, and that was her ambition. So I think she was the one who put my name up, said you should go there, because if you go around there, then the surgery for that child will be, you have to ask Kailash for some favor. So I just, for the fun of it, it was actually just a passing thought that I applied, and because at that time it had to go through government and everything else. And I had knee surgery before that, so I then cancelled. But by that time the government had already decided I was to go on that. And I sent a telegram saying I can't make it, then sent a telegram back saying please pay so much money immediately. And I realized that trying to communicate with our Indian government is all one-way side. They say something and they don't listen to what you're saying. So anyhow, I had to pay the money, and I went to Delhi and passed the medical and trekked to Kailash. So it just happened that way, and I must say that also affected me because of doing that trek, which is very hard. And what you see around you, it's not so much the spiritual, but the sheer beauty of the landscape that you're passing through, and the sense of awe and grandeur that it makes you feel totally different. I mean, I know Kailash is very, very, very sacred to people, and I did go around it. But at the same time, I understood it's just a symbol, that it is, the journey is really to go, to make that trek, to go through that landscape, and to understand your own life through it. So that did change me as well.
There are four factors that the world grapples with, four thought processes. What is destiny? What is religion? What is God? Who is God? And what is spirituality? I think people confuse themselves with these four parameters and their events in their lives. In your life, if Bhima had not come into your life, if you had not gone through those experiences, you would not have made that trek to Mansarovar perhaps. And so, do you hold a different view of destiny, religion, God, and what according to you is spirituality?
I think, are people looking for such wisdom from me here? I'm not a sadhu or a guru. I just happen to be a writer. Okay, it's no, my idea is I'm not a religious person at all. I have no belief in any religion. And I have to say, I can contribute that both to my father and grandfather and even my grandmother. So I have no religion as such. It's a spirituality, you know. I try to live the way I want. I try to do my living without trying to harm anybody deliberately. And as to the existence of God, I'm still in that place where I don't very, very doubtfully exists. Because if he did, I'm sure he's gone a long time ago. There's an interesting video somebody sent the other day of Google had made, that it starts off on a young woman lying on the grass, and the camera starts pulling back and back and back, and it goes through the solar system, through the galaxy, through the thing, and the Earth, everything shrinks, and then it's 3 trillion light years away. And then the camera comes back again and then goes into the eye of the person. It's such a fascinating, it just struck one that here we are on Earth thinking it's so important, but as this camera pulls away from Earth, Earth vanishes because it's just a dot in the whole universe. So if you're asking about my belief in God, that certainly exists.
Thank you. And that's a very straightforward answer, and my experience as well. Although I grew up in a very conservative background, but I pretty much can relate to what you're saying. Is there destiny? I think there's just this life and the experiences we go through. Could Bhima not have come into their lives? Well, then this question would be redundant.
Well, destiny at times is a coincidence. Life, things happen. The way we met Bhima, the way I met my wife. I mean,
Right.
you're not planning anything, but these things happen.
These things happen. So I think the way to deal with this question of destiny is always about what is it that you have and what can you do with what you have. And religion, I think religion makes bad spaghetti of a very good concept, which is, to me, spirituality is the inner awareness. The fact that you said it's the space of the Kailash that expands, that kind of makes you feel how small you are in the larger scheme of the universe. You know, that is that spiritual moment, and I think there is no religion called for that. So I kind of relate to that answer. Thank you. But those were fascinating books, both of them. Though some people did criticize your work on naming your co-yatris and or talking about their mannerisms. But I think I liked it because it gave us I haven't been to Kailash myself, but it gave us a peek into what the journey could be with people that you are connecting with for the first time. So fascinating works, both of them. And I still feel, therefore, as a writer, your best is in the non-fiction genre. But would you agree, or do you feel fiction is your strength?
Well, both.
Both.
Yeah, I enjoy doing both fiction and non-fiction, and I'm trying to do a non-fiction book now and working on it at the same time.
Very, very nice. Okay, we'll now open up the floor for questions from the audience. I do have one or two questions, but I'll wait for the audience to finish and then come right back to Tim. Yes, Debbie.
Tim, do you take notes? You know, if you have certain experiences or you meet people, do you only write notes about what you've experienced?
I do keep a diary, and I do often, I do kind of make jottings, and especially when I'm starting to write a book, then I keep making notes about the characters I'm writing about, and often I will relate them to a real person, change the name of course, and keep little notes about, but I'm not always note-taking. It's just trying to absorb what I've seen and what I've heard and storing it away. I might scribble a note to myself or put it on my computer just to say, think about it that way. So I do that often as not, of just making small notes about who I've met and what I've done.
Next question. Yes, Sri.
In your association with Playboy.
Oh, my association was not with Playboy, it was with
Penthouse. I was surprised because I left it out in the introduction. It wasn't intentional, but
it turned out at that time that my partner at that time was Bob Guccioni's PR, and so he started Penthouse magazine, and I got to know him quite well, and he had this magazine he'd asked me to write for occasionally, and I found I was more famous writing for Penthouse than I was for writing for The Guardian for the last 10 years of my life. But just to go on with Bob, so I was moving to New York, and he said, "Do you have a place to stay?" So I said, "No, I'll find an apartment or something like that." And so he said, "You can stay in this place I've just bought because I need someone there." And he bought a 42-room townhouse on 67th Street between Madison and Fifth Avenue. And so I had the key to this place, and it was vast. It had a ballroom, it had a swimming pool, and everything else. And Bob said, "Just all you have to do is be caretaker there and make sure everything works, and you can do your writing." So I was living free in New York for about 7 months, until one day I get this knock on this door, 6 o'clock in the morning, something. There were a load of firemen outside saying the house is on fire. So I lost my rent-free house in the most posh locale of New York, and had to move to the Upper West Side. Yeah, so I knew Bob very well.
Next question.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mo.
Tim, do you ever write with a certain audience in mind?
That's a good question, because writers, you do have just over the horizon an audience, even though you're trying to write partly for yourself, but you're always also thinking, will somebody read this, and who am I really wanting this book to be read by? You want, of course, a wider audience as possible, but you're not going to always get it. So you do have a vague idea of who you're writing for, but you don't let it overtake your thinking.
Okay.
But it's there, because it's a marketplace you're also writing for as a writer.
Yes, Arun.
So, I sometimes write small stories and narrate it to the public. So my question is, I always try to follow the 3-act structure, because I have learned so much about screenplay. But many mentors tell me not to get stuck up with the 3-act structure and just go with the flow. Do you believe in the 3-act structure? Okay.
I know that's the most popular way of thinking of it, the 3-act structure. And I know for the first 20 pages, then you switch it around, and then you go to the up to page 70, 80. I think you really, if you look at films nowadays, you know, I was looking at a couple of films that there isn't really a 3-act structure. It's sometimes a story is cyclical, and the 3-act structure is, of course, the easiest way to start your first script or your first couple of screenplays. But as you get more confident, I think you should start becoming a bit more adventurous, of trying to tell the story in a different way. And there's another, I remember reading something else about some American screenwriter who worked out another method of writing a screenplay which has more than, it's not just 3 chapters, he worked out about 12 different ways of putting in that, splitting it into about 12 parts. But, I mean, the rule of thumb is 3 acts, I know that. But I think you can, nowadays more and more filmmakers are experimenting with different ways of telling the story. I mean, if you look at Tarantino's, some of Tarantino's films or some other films, they go back and forth in time. It's not really 1, 2, 3.
Next.
I think that's it.
There are no questions, so I can go back to my couple of questions. You referred to your meeting Maureen, so I came up with a question right there, but I thought I'll ask you later. So, how did you meet Maureen, and how much of your companionship has influenced some of your writing?
Well, I was living in New York, visiting London. She was coming from Australia, visiting London, and we ended up in the right place, but at the wrong times, or the right time, but the wrong places. So that's how we met. She wasn't very happy with me when she first saw me.
Is that true?
Yeah, and what was the other?
The other question, your companionship with her, how much of it reflects in your writing, in terms of
First date.
First date. Yeah, I remember our first date. But Maureen does look at my writing, and she's my first reader, so there is feedback, and because she reads extensively, and so I do trust her opinion, because she has read lots of books, and so she'll come back and say, I think maybe this needs to be changing and that needs to be. So in many ways she's a sounding board, that when I'm working I go back and forth and take a suggestion. Sometimes I don't, it's just how she reacted to a sentence or not, or a story. So it is really very important for me that she's there to give me the feedback I need.
So that's as a reader, you get that feedback. But I'm talking also about your companionship as a couple, the part where you often talk about in some of your books, about the need for love as a basic human need.
Yeah.
And so is that something that shows in your work as well?
Well, I hope so. No, she's someone I do love very deeply, and so it might reflect in one work, but I'm not reflecting the same story time and time again.
Okay.
So she doesn't appear in my novels, or she doesn't think she doesn't appear, but so yeah, so she can be disguised and name changed and everything else. This is what I always do anyhow.
How does your writing process work? Like, you come up with, I know from some of the reading that I did that for almost 5 years you didn't write between 88 and 93 when you had some legal issues to sort out soon after coming back from the US. here in India. And so are there spells when you don't write at all, or do you have a rigor for writing? And during that time, how do you deal with that time? Do you shut yourself up and say, I gotta get this out of my way, out of my system? How does the writing process happen?
Well, as any writer will tell you, it's a very disciplined craft or art or whatever you want to call it. So I do work from 8 to 1, or I'm at my desk from 8 to 1. And so I try and write, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And during that period when you talked about, there were too many things going on that I couldn't work on. So sometimes you need to take that break. And so basically my schedule has always been the same wherever I've been in the world. I work from about 8 to 1, 1:30, then go and play tennis or squash and everything else, and by 8 o'clock I need a drink. So that's the way my schedule is.
It's past 8 o'clock, and there's no bar stool or bar here. But how do you, when you write, just one more question there on the writing process. When you write, some people do have a tendency to trash what they've written and rewrite it when they reread it. Is that something that you always save till the very end when the edits start happening, or do you continuously challenge yourself with how to express yourself better?
Well, writing is only just rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. You know, when you're writing it, you're rewriting it. So it's a constant process. It's not I sit down and write page 1 and finish at page 200. Sometimes I don't get past page 15. It might take me, gonna need that page rewritten, and then I go back and rewrite. And so writing is a constant process of rewriting. So you have to be very patient when you're writing, because you have to just keep reworking it. Sometimes you can get it better, sometimes it doesn't work, but you're hoping to get it better each time you do a rewrite. So it's a constant process that goes on. You don't just wait for the editor, and then if you have a really good editor, you find that what you've just written needs to be rewritten all over again. Well, that's when you find a really great editor to work with, if you're lucky.
I'm so glad you said this. I asked this question particularly because I think, thanks to Puchi Venkat there, we are having this entire conversation recorded for a YouTube audience. And 2 points I'd like to amplify. One is the discipline of writing every day. And I think if in any craft, you have to have riyaz. And if you're a singer, you're a dancer, you have to have riyaz. In a writer's case, it is that discipline of being able to write every day. That's one thing I'm picking up from him. And the other is, writing is actually a process of rewriting. And there is nothing wrong if you go back and edit what you've written and rewrite it. So that amplification is mainly for a young audience that may at some time tune into this YouTube video and pick up some pearls of wisdom there. One last question before I wind up. Your idea after all this that you've been through and you've seen so much of life, your idea of happiness, what gives you the maximum happiness? Or what is happiness according to you?
Well, happiness is you can only be happy in short periods. I mean, you can't be happy all your life unless you're absolutely nuts. Because I think the best one can hope for is to be contented. You try and be contented with what you've got. And happiness might go up and then come down, but it's trying to keep a life that you're contented with. I'm not saying you have to be so self-centered, but happiness is something that one writes about, like the Americans have the pursuit of happiness, which is a waste of time. But the contentment is enough for one to live life.
Thank you. That's a beautiful answer. Thank you. That's amazing. There's not things that he creates. And we also think that an artist creates. But Osho says, a true artist is one who allows creation to happen. And therefore, in the entire journey of Tim, and I've covered only like maybe a percentage of it, 10%, 20%, this evening. We need probably an entire day to go through all your works. But in that, all that prolificity could not have happened if he had not allowed creation to happen through him. And I wish you all the best, and thank you so much for coming here and being with us.